This is CNN Breaking News.
Let's get some analysis on all of this. Aviation and Maritime Attorney Dan Rose is with me. He's also a former Navy pilot. I mean, when you're hearing all this, my question about, well, why would the airline, green light the flight in the first place after all these missiles have been flying right toward U.S. bases in Iraq? But the other question is, how credible are these reports that it could have been a missile that accidentally took this plane down? What do you think?
Yeah, there are layers of responsibility here for not putting a plane up in the middle of a war zone. I mean, the airline should not have put it up there. The Iranians certainly should not have let it up there. It just kind of baffles, logic that plane was allowed to be sent up in the air when missiles were flying.
In terms of the investigation, how will they be able to determine? Are there telltale signs of some sort of missile hitting a plane? Like, what will they be looking for, investigators?
Sure. I mean, you could already see, just on the rough information that's out on the internet, that the plane was continuing to fly and continuing to accelerate, so that really doesn't suggest that it was a mechanical failure, at least related to the engine. Obviously, you could have a complete explosion, which we've seen on other aircraft like TWA 800. But there's going to be a lot of data. Obviously, the black boxes, if there's no indication of mechanical failure on the black boxes, the logical conclusion is something else.
And I want to come back to the black box point just a second. Hold tight. I'm being told, let's go to the Pentagon, to our correspondent there, Barbara Starr, and she has some news. Barbara, what are you learning?
Well, Brooke, a U.S. official, I want to say not in the Pentagon, somewhere else in the U.S. government, tells me that they now are certain that it was two Russian-made SA-17 surface-to-air missiles that the Iranians fired against the Ukrainian commercial airliner. This official tells me that they had some certainty of this Wednesday morning, the morning after the airliner went down, but they were taking some time to try and verify this intelligence, including that an Iranian radar element on the ground had painted, if you will, the airliner, meaning that the Iranians had electronically locked onto the airliner. So now they believe not only that the intelligence they saw the morning after this airliner went down was valid, they have taken the time to verify it and make sure of what they are looking at. Now, this goes to motive. We have reported earlier in the day that the U.S. believes the Iranians, most likely, the working theory is that they accidentally brought down the airliner, that somewhere on the ground this Iranian crew did not realize perhaps this was a civilian airliner. This is a working theory that goes to motive. But what we know now is that the U.S. government has the intelligence, the electronic intelligence, if you will, to back this up. They have, let me explain a bit further. The U.S. operates satellites, airborne intelligence gathering systems that scoop up radar and electronic signals in the environment. And obviously, with everything going on, these kinds of intelligence assets, satellites, aircraft, had been watching over Iranian airspace almost continuously because of the concern about Iran, as we know, firing these ballistic missiles against the U.S. in Iraq. So you had the assets up there. It's very much like when the U.S. keeps watch on North Korea. The U.S. military, the U.S. intelligence community has significant classified abilities to see, hear, scoop up essentially these electronic signals in the environment. So they see this electronically happening, and when they get these radar signals, they are able to determine what kind of missile it is, the trajectory, and what it might be headed towards. This is, if nothing else, for self-defense of the U.S. military and self-defense of U.S. assets in any region. In this case, they saw it, the intelligence, they analyzed it the morning after the plane was brought down, but it was until today that they were really able with some certainty to say this is what they believe happened. Two Russian-made SA-15s owned and operated by the Iranians. Motive, they believe probably accidental, but that's motive. That doesn't go to the question of exactly technically what happened that brought this civilian airliner down. I will say also, I think a number of aviation experts are saying that it is the debris of the plane that is going to have to be analyzed for explosive residue, to see what exactly was there. Because if there is explosive residue on the plane debris, it would be a unique type of explosive residue to a missile rather than just aviation fuel from a crash.
Okay, so it was Russian surface-to-air missiles shot from Iran.
Russian-made, purchased, operated, whatever you want to call it, by the Iranian military.
Okay. Barbara Starr, that's a huge piece of news. Let me just pivot back over to Dan. So if that is what the U.S. is now concluded happened, what is the recourse? I mean, I'm thinking of all these families, right? What's the recourse for this?
Well, that's a whole other question, and it's a difficult one because if the recourse in terms of legally is probably limited against Iran. They're not going to be too cooperative. They haven't. I mean, we're still getting judgments against them for 9/11 that
there may not be any
showing up on. Right.
What about your point about the black boxes? And Iran is saying they're not going to let the U.S. get their hands on them. And again, this was a Boeing plane. This was an American plane. How does the U.S. get in on this?
Well,
don't they have to?
I think there's going to be a lot of other information, as Barbara pointed out. You're going to have signatures from the launching, probably. You're going to have electronic information about what happened. You're going to see the wreckage in a certain way that's either indicative of shrapnel or the way the plane broke off. So I think there will be a lot of information that would support the shoot-down theory, so you don't need the black boxes, but those would be definitive, because if there's nothing else in a black box, then there's no other explanation.
All right. Dan, thank you.
Sure.
Dan Rose.